Apple really has this AI moat working for them. So I think Apple has a competitive advantage here, but I'm really curious to see if they're only going to, stay in that hardware lane.
All that and more on today's Mixture of Experts. I'm Tim Hwang, and welcome to another episode of Mixture of Experts. Each week, MOE brings together a group of the nicest, smartest people working at the frontiers of artificial intelligence to lead you through the week's news. On this week's episode, we've got Sandhya Iyer, Associate Partner, AI and Analytics, Kopecki, AI Engineer, and Kush Varshney, IBM Fellow. Welcome to you all. Thanks for coming on the show. We've got 4 big stories today that we're going to cover. Another gigantic investment deal coming out of Amazon. We're going to talk a little bit of some interesting results coming out of the Adobe Summit this week. And we'll talk about Mythos, the Anthropic model leaking. But I actually want to start with perhaps one of the big leadership changes of the week. News has come out that Tim Cook, after leading Apple for many years now, will be stepping down and retiring, with John Ternus coming up and leading the company. And his background is really in the hardware part of the business. He was involved in the launch of iPad and AirPods and many generations of iPhone, Mac, and the Apple Watch. And so I wanted to kind of take this discussion because obviously there's been a bunch of speculation about like Tim Cook's legacy and would, Steve Jobs be a supporter of this? But obviously at MOE to spend a lot of time thinking about the AI aspect of all this. And so maybe Kush, I'll kick it over to you first. How do you read Ternus's kind of accession to the CEO of Apple? Is this ultimately a kind of bull signal for Apple's continued push into AI, or is it almost kind of like a step away from it, maybe?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, Apple is a hardware company, and it makes a lot of sense that they chose their hardware guy to take the lead. But as I was going through his background, his sort of accomplishments, one thing really stuck out to me, which is his focus on kind of reliability, durability, repairability, accessibility, these sort of things. And I think if he can bring that to AI, I think that would be really great because, Steve Jobs obviously said computing being a bicycle for the mind. And I think one interesting thing about bicycles is that they're very accessible, right? They're very
yeah, you don't want the wheels popping off.
Yeah, they're very repairable too. Like if the wheels do pop off, you can go and anywhere you can get it fixed, right? So hopefully that ethos comes through, and hopefully in the AI side of it as well.
And that's actually something I did want to touch on a little bit is, Sandhya, I think we've talked a little bit about this in the context of sort of AI being a discipline, which is often like guess and check. And these aren't like perfect systems that you can get to run in exactly the way you want hardware to run. There was an argument that I think someone was making on MOE a little while back that, this has really limited Apple because they're so sort of conservative in some ways. And I guess kind of question for you is like, is that the wrong way of thinking about AI? Like, are we now kind of approaching the point where it is going to be sort of reliable and like a hardware CEO like Ternus is going to be able to like really fully get the benefit of this technology? Or is it just ultimately still kind of like a conflict between, almost ways of doing engineering work?
I think in this context, especially in Apple's context, or maybe I'm saying this wrong, but letting AI be rogue doesn't make sense. And I would expect someone like, as what Kush just mentioned, someone like John Ternus to actually come with that specific idea of, reliability, stability, and all of that. Now, the interesting part here is we don't have, I know Apple has an AI as a discipline under software, but it doesn't have AI as the front runner, or it's not AI first yet, at least in terms of the leadership. I personally am like looking forward to see how they approach that, because then having like a 2 in a box would be interesting, and that's probably the right move for Apple. That's my take on it.
Brie, one of the things that also kind of comes to mind is we've talked a lot about kind of Apple like really wanting to control every aspect of the experience. But Apple has also been one of the most prolific companies at, for example, outsourcing a lot of their hardware operations and their manufacturing. They've also, and in the AI space, kind of very flatly decided to partner with other big AI companies to do this sort of stuff. And so I guess kind of like maybe like the main question I'd have for you is, I think ultimately, do you think like a lot of AI is just going to be, part of, it's almost like an app store paradigm for Apple, that they're going to own the hardware gate, and at the end of the day, they sort of see all these models as kind of like ultimately sort of fungible? Or do you think kind of like Apple's eventually going to say like, hey, we're going to do really just like specifically Apple AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest, I've been really underwhelmed with Apple's approach to AI over the last years. We have companies like, every other major company that's been a game player, investing heavily in AI. And then we have all the newer companies like OpenAI or Anthropic really, really dominating. So I've been really underwhelmed. But I think one thing we need to see very clearly is that Apple understands that there's a software part, and we have lots of things running in the cloud when it comes to AI, but Apple really has this AI moat working for them. So I think Ternus John Ternus really understands that this is an advantage to them, and they're going to use that moving forward. Because you mentioned the Apple Store, right? And running different applications that run LLMs locally. What that requires is massive compute. And this massive compute creates heat. So you're going to need some technology that handles that heat creation or that's running in the palm of your hand, essentially. So using 3D printed titanium, which we all know is running in the Apple Watch, that allows you to act as a heat sink for those computes. So I think Apple has a competitive advantage here, but I'm really curious to see if they're only going to, stay in that hardware lane or also branch out and do bigger things, which I think they should do and will do.
Yeah, I think the ambition here, I think, is one of the interesting things that I did want to touch a little bit on. I mean, Kush, you're actually a perfect person to ask about this. One of the things I got really excited about when Apple started to really kind of turn the gears on sort of AI was the idea that they were going to achieve the dream of kind of like distributed private AI, right? They had made privacy such a big part of like their sales pitch. And so the idea that all the AI could happen kind of like on device with very little going to the cloud was like a genuinely pretty exciting architecture. That dream seems to have fallen a little bit by the wayside. I mean, what's your assessment, especially with Tim Cook stepping down now, is that still a technical feasibility? Like, is that a dream that we should believe in? Or is, Apple kind of going to go the way of everybody else and a lot of it's just going to be cloud?
Yeah, I think, this trend has been the case for quite a while, which is that if you just wait a few months, the capabilities of larger models are possible with smaller models. And I don't see that kind of trend slowing down. So, just an 8 billion parameter model can do, stuff in 6 months, we'll be able to do things that, let's say, a 120 billion parameter model is doing now. So I think the edge story is going to be there. And I think coming back to this app store idea, I think it's also going to be models with adapters to get them to be like more capable on specific things. And you can have app stores of adapters, app stores of skills, these sort of things. And hopefully, Apple goes in that direction. I think it would make a lot of sense.
So Sandhya, what do you think? Do you think kind of like, in some ways, it feels like a lot of this code gen stuff is going to lead to a world where it's, the app store, like, does it even make sense to have apps anymore in a world where you just tell your phone what you want and it can do it on the fly? I guess as we think about kind of the future of Apple, do you think that's also under threat in the current sort of AI era?
Oh yeah, I'm already creating my own apps right
That's
now.
right.
Why do I need to go to the app store, right? With all the open cloud code and all of that being there. I think we spoke about this weeks back when this was a topic. So yeah, I think that's also true that app store is no longer, it's not going to be like the differentiating factor.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it. Obviously, John Ternus is going to have to prove to us here at MOE that he can do the job, but we'll be sure to talk to him going forward. Great. I'm going to move us on to our next topic. Really interesting story. Another huge monster investment announced by Amazon this week. They stated on Monday that they'd be investing an additional $5 billion in Anthropic, with kind of sort of milestones that Anthropic can hit that would raise that investment to $25 billion. And a big part of this, which we've been watching for some time, is this interesting relationship where Anthropic, like every other lab in the space, is extremely compute constrained. And so part of this deal is that Anthropic literally turns around and buys lots and lots of cloud services from Amazon. And this is part of a dynamic that we've seen. NVIDIA will invest in a company, that company immediately turns around and, buys NVIDIA chips. I guess, Bree, what's your take on this kind of increasingly tight relationship, I guess, between Amazon and Anthropic? And I guess specifically like in between the cloud business and what Anthropic is doing?
Right. Yeah. I don't think it comes as a surprise. Anthropic is essentially choking on their own success, which is a nice problem to have, right? But it forces you to look for resources and partnerships in the market that can allow you to continue to soar as they have been. So this thing here, I mean, it's to me, it's kind of like a quid pro quo. Unfolding in front of our eyes, Anthropic investing over $100 billion in cloud services from AWS. It's a massive deal. But it also, we have to look at the underlying technology that Amazon is providing here, which we already know NVIDIA has been, providing GPUs, which are great for general computations. The Trainium 2 chip uses ASIC, which stands for Application-Specific Integrated Circuit, and it just allows for more specialized computations, and along the way, you can save a lot of resources, which if we're looking at the workloads and the compute demand that Anthropic is facing, you're going to be making a lot of savings along the way. So it's not surprising. Interested to see how that partnership will continue to unfold, though.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we should get into the compute aspects of this, which I think are genuinely really interesting. The ASICs point that Bree, you just made, I think is fascinating because, GPUs in some ways are great, but they're very general. ASICs, you get a lot of performance, but they're very specific. And I kind of look at that and I say, okay, well, Anthropic's obviously going to immediately become one of Amazon's biggest customers in this front. And so is this a world where, Kush, almost like these clouds are going to become a lot more almost model provider specific over time? Like you can imagine Amazon having like an Anthropic specific ASICs, which make it work at just a way higher level of efficiency otherwise. The downside, I guess, is that there's a little bit of lock-in, right? That it's hard for Anthropic to move, and it's also hard for Amazon to move from that relationship.
Yeah. So it's a great question, right? I think when you had, people selling shovels to gold miners, the shovels could be used by any of them, right? But the ASIC, as you're saying, it does then start getting that lock-in, the match to the workloads, the CUDA, all of that sort of stuff, right? So I think maybe there will be some lock-in, but then what has also happened in the history of computing is there's been these layers that translate, right? So whether it's compilers or any sort of other thing that kind of makes that job easier of going between the hardware and the software. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see, but clearly it's part of the strategy for Amazon. They do want to get this sort of lock-in going.
Yeah, for sure. Sandhya, I guess maybe the question I had for you is who has the power in this relationship? Because I hit a little bit of the news story here, right? Which is on one hand, Amazon says, we're going to give you $5 billion. We might even give you as much as $25 billion. And I look at that and, your eyes pop out and you say, well, what a huge number. And you read a little further down, it says, Anthropic also agreed to purchase more than $100 billion worth of Amazon cloud services. And, I'm no financial expert, but you see $25 billion going one way and $100 billion going the other way. Who's in control? Is this a cloud story or is this an AI story in some sense?
I think from Amazon's side, it is about the fact that I have these chips. It's them trying to like say that I have these chips that this frontier model is being powered by. So you don't. It's my statement against NVIDIA or trying to play the chip game. So I think it's that, and from Anthropic's end, it is about saying that okay, I am committed to the enterprise word because it is all about reliability and stability for them, capacity for them. So it's a two-way thing, and saying that So I believe it's a two-way victory path. It's not cyclical, but yeah.
I think, Sandhya, you got a good point there. I think the numbers, though, speak for themselves. I think Amazon definitely has the bigger hand right now for the time being, because if Anthropic doesn't find the infrastructure and the technological capability of its massive models, and I know we're going to talk about Mythos here in a second as well. So Amazon has the upper hand here, and Anthropic is lucky to partner with them for the time being. They depend on that infrastructure, and Amazon is providing it. So I think it's clear that they have to dance the dance with them.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
It could change in the
that-
future. It could change, but those numbers speak volumes to me.
Yeah, and that's actually you're touching on, Bree, exactly the kind of last item I wanted to talk about here was, it kind of feels like it's like Game of Thrones, right? Where like it kind of feels like there's this alliance now between Anthropic and Amazon, and of course on the OpenAI side, it's like OpenAI and Microsoft. Like it does kind of feel like there's these kind of like stacks forming where these very tight relationships between cloud and model provider, and then even like hardware, and then I think increasingly maybe even energy. Like it kind of feels like you almost have these kind of two independently operating ecosystems in some ways with all these alliances forming. Is that the right way to think about where this market is going, or do you think it's going to be a little bit more promiscuous? Like you said, like maybe things change and Anthropic's one day going to be like, actually, we want to go do more stuff with Azure, and it's actually it's not as locked in as I'm making it sound.
Yeah, I think you're onto something here. I think we're watching the founding fathers of AI, right? So just kind of like how America was formed, and you had the original founding fathers that stepped forward and formed alliances and conquered the land, and this is what we're seeing unfold in front of our eyes, right? So I think for the time being, we're going to see some massive collaborations like this, which I think we need to be careful with the word collaboration, because both need each other's, is exactly what Sandhya said. But they also heavily depend on each other. I think once the dust settles and the space of AI will be more democratized, and I'm really hoping we will have lots of thought leaders who are making sure that we democratize the space, then we'll see more of that collaboration that you mentioned. That's my guess, based on history and in technology and all other spaces.
That's great. Well, it brings up maybe like a final item. Sandhya, I think, we're talking a little bit about how some of this hardware might become more specialized with time. Do you think that's going to be a threat to the open ecosystem? I think that's maybe like a final thing that kind of comes to mind is that like, well, you imagine a world where the chips are really designed for whatever specific models OpenAI is doing or the really specific models Anthropic is doing. Does it mean that like in some ways open will become more compute constrained because it's like not going to be necessarily specialized for these like chips, which are kind of like really kind of going into proprietary models?
What I actually read about, especially the Anthropic and Amazon one, is that Amazon will tightly couple this or design their chips specifically for Anthropic or for Claude. And that actually goes away from the open ecosystem comment. And but in a way, I guess I'm not answering this question, but I'm tying it up to the previous question.
All good,
because
yeah.
I feel that that's good for Anthropic. I mean, it's a tight partnership now. Now it's just that they coexist, and Anthropic gains all the optimizations and the cost effectiveness that this partnership leads to, or this tight coupling of the chip design specific to them is good for them in terms of everything.
Yeah.
So I guess in what I just said, we're going away from open ecosystem.
Exactly. I know, Krish, good thing, bad
Maybe
thing?
it's yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know my general perspective. Bad
Oh, I
thing.
know, yeah.
Bad thing, right?
Bad
but
thing, right?
yeah, but I mean, definitely need to support the open ecosystem, but I think there isn't that much difference in the model architectures, right? When you're looking across the board. So, like, how much can you really specialize? I really don't know. So that's another sort of point on this.
Well, great. I'm going to move us on to our next story of the day. Adobe Summit was just happened recently. This is kind of like the big summit that Adobe holds. It's where they do a lot of their product announcements. And it was also kind of a cool opportunity. IBM Institute for Business Value, IBV, released a report in collaboration with Adobe, specifically looking at dynamics on customer intent and customer loyalty. I want to dive into those numbers in just a second, but Sandhya, you were actually there. And so curious about your impressions about the Adobe Summit and anything you were excited about, kind of trends that you think our listeners should pay attention to coming out of that
for
event.
sure. I think like every other AI summit that we've had, the story was all about orchestration. It was all about the AI infrastructure. It was not about Adobe's next Firefly model or something like that. It was all about the ecosystem that supports agentic AI. And their announcements were all screaming about that. And I'll call out some specific things that I was personally excited about. The Adobe CX Enterprise platform that they released. It's pretty interesting in a way that it is designed to support the infrastructure orchestration that's needed for end-to-end marketing AI workflows, which is very cool. And it is something that IBM is also currently working on. And it was very nice to see that and we've been working on that within ourselves and also with our enterprise clients. And so it was nice it was obvious that Adobe would come up with that design, which supports all of it. And it was also nice to see Jensen and Shantanu share a very friendly keynote. I'm not sure if anybody saw it. If you've not seen it, it was worth watching. And the other interesting thing for me was, again, Gen Studio. This is because I'm very close to content supply chain workflows. And this is also, and I've had the opportunity to work on Adobe Gen Studio, but I think the new one is, it has a lot more features from ensuring that your end-to-end creative workloads are like managed, orchestrated well across, and which is great. I mean, I'm really excited about what all of us do with it. I actually wrote a blog post about this saying the technology is ready to serve. It all depends on how we put together all of this. And there's a lot of governance and organizational change management and bringing in all the right data into it. Again, I'm passionate about this. I'll keep going on and on. But that's my 5 minute spiel on it.
That's really good. And yeah, I don't know, we don't talk about Adobe very much on the show, but I actually think in some ways they kind of are like a sleeping giant in the space. In the same way that like something like Microsoft Office is like a sleeping giant in the space, right? It is this software that's like so integrated into the workflow of so many businesses that the ability to like flip a switch here and there in terms of how people work has like these huge ripple effects through the economy. And it sounds like they're investing a lot in like how do you actually get like, you know, the really basic stuff of like how do you get AI to make like the content pipelines much more efficient. What do you think the next bit of work is? I mean, you suggested a little bit like it feels like the next bit is change management. Like it feels like that's going to be where a lot of the next leg of work is to like even get the benefit of these tools. Do you think that's kind of where we're going in this space?
No, I think the first thing is like making sure you have the right data. The data work is the main thing. And then once you have the right data coming in, you've figured out all your workflows. It's like your process transformation. I think it's a clear process transformation effort. And that's where you begin with. And then going into the change management governance aspect of it, which is a huge orchestration that's needed by itself. So yeah. And I just wanted to like call out things around the fact that visibility was like the key theme of Adobe Summit, and I'm saying this from visibility not just from a brand perspective, but visibility from what is happening within your workflows. So I think that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, it feels like it can become a real shared problem, particularly as all this agent stuff picks up. It'll just be like, do I know exactly what my
Which is
computer is
very
doing when I'm
complex. Yeah.
you know? Well, let's dive a little bit into the numbers on this IBM IBV study. Bree, I guess I'll start with kind of like the top line number, right? So I think the study took a look and said, okay, how are people using sort of AI assistants in making up their mind about what to purchase? And the basic finding in some ways, I was like, yep, that squares with my understanding, right? Which is they find that the use of this for purchasing decisions goes up by like 62%, in the last 2 years. Totally makes sense. I think the next little bit I found really interesting, because the way we normally tell this story is like, oh, young kids use AI. They're doing crazy stuff with like TikTok, and that's where all the interesting purchasing decisions are happening. But what they find is like the boost among Gen X and boomers is really where a lot of the action is, it seems like. And that actually there is this kind of like generational slant where older users are using this technology more for purchasing decisions. So help me think through that. I mean, it's very counterintuitive in my mind because I'm kind of just like, I don't know, my parents would never use this stuff for purchasing. So.
Well, mine do.
Yeah.
And
So,
actually,
your mileage may vary.
No, everyone's going to have a little bit of a different personal experience here, but I thought that was really interesting as well. So we have an adoption of this technology. So interacting with website, making purchasing decisions. With Gen X, I believe, was an 82% adoption, and boomers even 92%. And you mentioned our parents. Actually, my dad he's incredible when it comes to AI because he has a very low tolerance. And I think a lot of people of that generation, he has a very low tolerance of dealing with useless hostile environments online. So there's all this AI that you can use to interact with. And another thing that they have is they have a low tolerance of dealing with that, and they have disposable income, which Gen Z does not have. Okay? So if you have money and you're sick and tired of navigating hostile environments, yeah, you're going to you're going to tell an AI agent, hey, this is the thing I want, get it for me. And they're going to choose the path of least resistance. And that's something companies need to understand. And I do this even less than my dad does. So I'm reminded every day that this is very much the trend. And I think Gen Z will eventually catch on. But that's something that companies nowadays need to be aware of and need to understand how the intent, where the intent is coming from the consumer base, and how to give them what they want. So it's no longer, people going on a website and searching for the best product and, you can catch them with a nice ad campaign. It's very much agents talking to agents, and that changes the game.
Yeah, Kush, and I think this is one thing I was curious to get your opinion on is, when you used to hire an ad agency, the ad agency would be like, how do I advertise to people who are going to buy the product? But now it's like, particularly with where MCP is going and like the design of websites that are specifically for AIs to access, I'm kind of like, is the future of advertising just convincing agents to, buy your product? And like, does that totally change the game in terms of like messaging and what you say? Because you're now advertising to the AI that will advise the human versus the human itself, it seems like.
Yeah, there was a paper by Microsoft Research last year about the agentic economy, and it was very well done, actually. Like, the first time I read it, it was like quite eye-opening, and it's exactly talking about all those sort of things. It's like agents advertising to other agents, ad agencies advertising to agents, optimizing instead of search engine optimization, optimizing for discovery, and what's the metadata that you need to have up there. And I think what Bree said is exactly right. I mean, you don't, like, these agents aren't going to tolerate like all the fluff, right? I mean, just give me the numbers. Like, I was trying to figure out our next car purchase, right? And like I don't need to see all of like the RAM ad with like all the trucks and the mud and stuff. Like just tell me the numbers, and I mean that's like the thing, right? So I think maybe that is where we're going, and uh, the other thing is that LLMs are good for understanding intent, right? I mean that's the kind of starting foundation for the study, and like computing again, like the history of computing has this new element which the LLM, which is like perfectly suited for understanding this thing, tapping into kind of like the mind perception and so forth. So yeah, I mean, like this is exactly the evolution that I would expect.
And if I may add, just based on the research and things like that are happening in this space, it is actually it's a combination of having a lot more creative content across platforms, making sure that you have information about your brand in Reddit and all the aggregator sites. Because like the AI search engine is actually going against how many mentions do you have, credible mentions of your content across all of these platforms. Do you have YouTube content, etc.? And also, do you have structured metadata that I can, read and understand? So it's a combination.
That word brand is so interesting. I mean, I only briefly worked in the ad industry, and it feels like the usual thing was like, oh, well, on one hand, you've got brand advertising, which is like the big glossy piece, like, page that you buy in Vogue magazine or something like that. And then you've got programmatic advertising, which is like very data driven and banner ads and that kind of stuff. I mean, does the idea of brand advertising to agents even make sense anymore? Because normally the idea of brand advertising is like, oh, like Nike, just do it, right? It's like it's trying to kind of tap into something like cultural and very subjective and very normative. I don't know, are agents susceptible to that kind of persuasion? I think it's like one of the interesting questions here. I don't know, Krish, I see you nodding a little bit, but curious about what you think about that.
Yeah, I think it could happen, but I think it's in terms of like how the metrics are set up for the agents, right? So the agent designers are setting up kind of what counts as success, and I think I mean click-through rate used to be a metric. Now it's maybe the completion of the actions, because if the autonomous agent isn't actually like finishing the job, then it's not succeeding. So maybe whatever side effects or whatever like latent variables it picks up on that eventually let it complete the job, that's what's gonna sell.
A final element of the study I want to touch on, and Bree, maybe I'll kick this question over to you, is the study also looks at basically like how quickly various industries can capture customer intent, which I think is a fun question, right? Is like once you get a signal that someone wants to buy something, how quickly do you like take advantage of that? And they do this kind of fun study which benchmarks across a bunch of industries. And I guess like maybe building on what Kush just said, the word intent is really interesting here because it almost suggests a world where like, I'm browsing online looking to, buy a sandwich. I click on, a website that's like a sandwich review website. And the question is who serves me the ad quickest so they can take advantage of that. But in a world of agents, is the idea of intent kind of disappearing or dissolving? Like normally there, it's like, oh man, Tim wants a sandwich. I got to sell him the sandwich right now. But in a world with agents, doesn't the agent just kind of have persistent intent? Like it's just trying to get me the sandwich. And so I guess kind of question for you is just thinking a little bit through how like even intent changes in a world where AIs are kind of like just trying to do something on my behalf versus me literally being the one that goes around the internet kind of clicking and, trying to find the product that I want.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think companies and brands, the brand relationship between the final consumer is going to change because of agents. You're no longer catering or trying to get to the eyeballs, the human eyeballs that are looking at the product. You're trying to plug your brand, your offering using APIs into the agents. I'm probably not really answering your question here, but I think that relationship around intent delegation is going to change. I think it's gonna be simplified a lot more in terms of, okay, so this person's interacting with this agent that's plugging into the brand and the offering of the brand. So it's simplified in terms of what does the user want? What can I get it? Less of if a human just scans through a website and is trying to establish an understanding of the brand. Kush mentioned shopping for a car. It's more of a feel based. So I think eventually it might become a little bit more touchy-feely, and there's going to be emotions worked into it, because brand is emotion. Branding is how do we feel about something. Do agents feel anything at this point? I think they feel like they look for intent. They are designed to deal with intent, but yeah, I guess I don't have a definite answer for you.
Yeah, totally. The future you're describing is very interesting in some ways. Is like the agent itself needs to have a sense of how long my intent lasts for. So it'd be like Tim always gets really hungry, but then, he gets distracted really easily. So, if I'm an agent trying to buy him lunch, if it's lasting more than half an hour, I should just not deal with it. And like, the agent's going to have to model that in some sense, which I think will be really interesting to see.
Right. And sometimes it might just be the hunger for information and not necessarily a purchase. So understanding those nuances, and we have some smart brains working on those agents. I think they'll understand those nuances and they'll interact successfully with the end user.
All right, final story of the day. I'll keep this last little bit quick, but I think I'd be remiss not to mention it. In some ways, it is the funniest AI story of the week. So I think just an episode or two ago, we were talking about Mythos, the rumored next model for Anthropic. Anthropic later made an announcement saying, yes, indeed, they're working on a model called Mythos, and it is indeed so powerful and so scary with regards to what it can do in cybersecurity that we're actually not going to release it at all. We're only going to allow a few companies to take a look at it, and otherwise it's going to be very under control. There's a story that came out of the Verge and kind of leaked around that it turns out that a relatively small group of people allegedly hanging out in what must be a Discord somewhere sort of just reverse engineered access to Mythos and had just access to this model for a period of time. So Kush, help me resolve this split screen. On one hand, you have a model that seems so dangerous that you can't release it. On the other hand, the security around it seems so soft that a bunch of nerds hanging out on Discord can seem to get access to it. So what are we seeing here? Is this just normal kind of cybersecurity failure? Is it proof that Mythos is all rhetoric? Like, what should I make of this?
Yeah, I think as humanity, we're all about stories, right? Oral narratives and so forth. And even the name Mythos implies it needs some mythology associated with it, right? And there's always this role in mythology from all over the world, right? There's some trickster who goes and steals fire from the gods and gives it to humanity and stuff, whether it's Prometheus or in the Greek world, Maui in the Polynesian world, whatever it is, right? And this is that story, right? And I think it's just building up that mythology and in those stories, eventually what happens is humanity loses its innocence and these sort of things, right? So maybe that's what this is indicating. I don't want to go into the security failures and stuff. I think the bigger story is the story part of it, the storytelling, and we'll see how that plays out.
Bri, any predictions on whether or not this makes it more likely or less likely that they will let all of us get the benefit of Mythos soon?
Not too soon, I think. I think we know Project Glasswing. The very same day this leak happened, Anthropic also released the model to the many mass, giant companies that were collaborating under Project Glasswing with them. So I think there's a strategic collaboration happening. I don't think this is meant for the public just yet, which is ironic because the public very much gained access through just a group of, nerds on a Discord group who were essentially, they went around. There was a massive data breach, and then they were just rattling digital doorknobs until one opened, and boom, it opened. So it's ironic, and I think it's also it reminds me, and it should remind all of us how incredibly messy technology actually is. As much as code is very structured, and at the end, if there's a small syntax error, your program will not work. So we think of technology being extremely clean and well structured and extremely organized, but it's actually a very messy space. I like the philosophical approach, though, you're taking, Kush. One has to do that sometimes because there's just so much happening.
That's great. Well, words to live by. Kush, Sandhya, Bree, thanks for joining us on the show. And thanks to all you listeners. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast platforms everywhere. And we'll see you all next week on Mixture of Experts.